Meantime, Senate and White House negotiators reaching an agreement overnight on that $2 trillion stimulus package to combat the economic pain of the coronavirus. Now, billionaire real estate investor Tom Barrack is warning that commercial mortgages are on the brink of collapse. Tom joins us this morning. He's founder, executive chairman, and CEO of Colony Capital. Tom, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. You have been sounding the alarm on the commercial real estate world and these mortgage-backed securities. And I want you to try to, just for the audience so we all understand where you're coming from, walk us through what you call the dominoes.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. Look, this is a complicated topic, and thanks to you and Joe and Becky, it's like Hermes and trying to tell the story of a really complicated Cornell or MIT PhD mathematics equation. But the simple way to look at it is after the too big to fail consequence that you covered brilliantly, the banking industry changed. And Dodd-Frank set capital requirements on banks that made it very restrictive for them to supply the normal mortgages to the small and middle-sized businesses. So what Steve was talking about earlier on liquidity and solvency is really the issue, is how does the money get to the little guys who are paying rent, who are paying interest on mortgages, that have restaurant, cafes, warehouses, hospitals, hotels, and that's through these intermediaries, which people generally call non-bank banks. So those non-bank banks originate mortgages. Those mortgages which are originated then are pooled in securities. And this is the danger of talking about mortgage-backed securities and CLOs, is everybody reflects on 2008 and says these weapons of mass destruction. That's not the case today. The problem that exists today is a liquidity event that was triggered by an unforeseen intervening governmental cessation of business. What happened in 2008 was over-lending and risky lending. And actually what exists today and the problem today is as a result of the solution, which is large equity amounts that are placed in front of that banking stack. And what makes it all work is making sure the system flows, right? That the plumbing works. And all we need today to make this work is a timeout. So when Steve was saying earlier that what every borrower, every cafe owner, every restaurant owner, and remember, we're talking about 7.1 trillion of GDP here. That's 63 million people who are working generally around these businesses, the real estate businesses. And they need to talk to their bank. But how do you have a conversation with a bank who has a litany of regulatory requirements that tell them that they can't forbear? And this is the key word right now, is forbear. What everybody needs, what the small businesses need, what the employers need, what the person who's paying rent needs, what the person who's paying a mortgage on their house or their building needs, is a timeout. Simply a timeout. And the architecture
so
of
Tom, how would you do that? Yeah. How do you do the timeout? How do you create that holiday, both for the mortgage payer or the renter, if you will, but then how do you create the timeout for somebody who's owning the commercial real estate as well, so that the bank doesn't foreclose?
Right. So there's three easy ways, and none of them are easy, by the way. You have the dream team here to do it. You have Jay Clayton at the SEC. You have Jelena McWilliams at the FDIC, Randy Quarles at the FEC, and Steve Mnuchin at the Treasury. You need all of those, because what you need to say is there's a regulatory stop on what they call mark-to-market. And without being too complex, the idea of marking all those loans to market for a bank so they have capital charges against it is why a bank can't come to a restaurant and say, time out, you don't need to pay. We'll take the interest, we'll tack it on over 5 years, or we'll tack it on to the back of the bank. And when all this is over, which is 90, 120, 180 days, we'll worry about it then. So you need regulatory relief, primarily from the SEC, GAAP accounting, these rules which were engineered after 2008 that say time out on mark-to-market, let these intermediaries then go back to the people who have rent and interest and say,
right.
No problem, you're not in default, we're not going to take away your houses. And the same thing for the banks, that they're not in default on the regulatory requirements. And that's what needs to happen.
Tom, if that doesn't happen, tell me what happens actually very specifically, just so people who may think this is self-serving. What would happen to Colony Capital if that does not happen?
Well, actually, Colony Capital is in great shape. We about 18 months ago started selling assets. So we've sold about 15 billion of assets. We've got 1.4 billion in liquidity. We shifted to a digital platform. We got the best F-18 rocket jockey, Mark Ganzi, to run the company. But what happens specifically at the REIT is we have about 6% of our portfolio in CRE debt securities. That's this investment grade arena is where this stops. Many of our peers have much greater amounts of non-investment grade credit, which stops, right? When payments stop, they market to market. There is no market, remember? So what's happening here is there's a mark to market and there is no market. So all of the collateral gets flushed. That's $3.5 trillion of commercial mortgages. It's 16 trillion of residential mortgages, and you'll have chaos. And you have chaos only because everybody just needed 60 to 90 days of breathing room. Not like it was in 2008, where you had overvalued assets.
Does the stimulus plan at all that seems to be on the table now help this in any way or no?
Not really, because look, the stimulus plan, they're doing the right thing, right? The Fed can do whatever they want. And as Neil Kashkari has said, when they're in, they're in. But what that does, what people don't see is that bill is primarily oriented to loans in investment grade corporations that then can be levered by Treasury 10 to 1. It doesn't address the small and medium-sized businesses. The small and medium-sized businesses mostly have two issues: rent and expenses. You need to give them a forbearance, right, stop their rent and interest, let them keep those employees hired as a result of that, and look at it in 90 days. If that doesn't happen, it's going to be chaos.
Tom Barrack, I hope that it doesn't turn into chaos, but we appreciate you joining us this morning and walking us through these dominoes, and we hope that you stay healthy and safe.